And that's how I got to go to prom with Gina Davis. But you probably already read about that in People. Hey, Drill Blue here. Have you ever eaten food before? That's like phagocytosis, the ingestion of foreign molecules.
Keep going.
We're gonna learn about that and more. Sorry,
Oh, sorry. I seem to have gotten a little bit carried away.
Now, the immune system can be divided into two groups: innate immunity and acquired immunity. Innate immunity is the rapid, non-specific response to pathogens. It is present from the time of birth and does not require pathogen exposure. External barrier defenses, like mucous membranes, the skin, and secretions, as well as internal defenses, such as phagocytic cells, antimicrobial cells, natural killer cells, and inflammatory response, all function within the innate immune system. Although innate immunity is found in invertebrates, we will focus on vertebrate immunity. Actually vomit. No. Well, that heckin' hurt. I would highly advise not to drink an entire most of a bottle of water. I feel bad for Vaso over here. He saw the chunks. But that's so. The show must go on, and so must the skit. Gluck, 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 gluck. Vertebrates have barrier defenses such as mucous membranes found in urinary, reproductive, and respiratory tracts, as well as the skin. Mucus allows for the entrapment and removal of pathogens and is hostile to microbes due to lysosome. Lysosome, which is found in many other body fluids like tears and saliva, haha, I know a thing about tears, breaks down microbial cell walls, resulting in cell death.
I get it.
The skin defends against pathogens by being acidic, which prevents microbes from surviving. The digestive system uses the same technique to avoid infection. Internal innate defenses include phagocytic leukocytes, or white blood cells. These phagocytic cells destroy microbes through engulfment and subsequent fusion with a lysosome. The four main types of phagocytic cells are neutrophils, which engulf and destroy microbes, resulting in self-destruction; macrophages, which are part of the lymphatic system and can present antigens; eosinophils, which discharge destructive enzymes; and dendritic cells, which present antigens in acquired immunity, especially the helper T cells. Here's a fun video to educate ya, fool!
Pathogens. are engulfed into the cell and surrounded in a vacuole. And then a lysosome with enzymes fuses with the vacuole, and it breaks down the pathogens, and then they exit the cell by exocytosis. That video is phagocytosis, by the way.
Also with an innate immunity, proteins and peptides can attack microbes directly or impede reproduction. Interferon, for example, inhibits viral reproduction and can activate macrophages. The complement system also protects against invaders, as it triggers inflammation and the bursting or lysis of invading cells. The inflammatory response is the innate defense mechanism to defend against an injury. It can be local or systemic. One example of systemic inflammatory response is a fever, which is triggered by chemicals released by both macrophages and pathogens. Here's another video to learn you the knowledge that I wish to give to you.
When you are injured, signal molecules trigger a set of events called the inflammatory response. When this splinter punctures the skin, it has pathogens on it. Macrophages are phagocytic cells that destroy microbes in innate immunity, like this example. They release cytokines to attract neutrophils, which are a common kind of phagocytic white blood cell. Immune cells called mast cells, which are in connective tissue, they release histamine. This histamine causes blood vessels to become more permeable, which allows fluid and neutrophils to exit the blood vessel and move towards the cytokines, which also moves them towards the pathogen. Then they digest the pathogen, and eventually the injury heals.
Wow, that sure was terrible. Whoever made that video was an imbecile.
It was me.
They forgot to mention that pus, a fluid high in dead microbes, cell debris, and phagocytes, accumulates at the site of inflammation. What an idiot! I should have made the video myself. Natural killer cells attack cells that no longer express class 1 MHC proteins, which all other cells other than red blood cells have. Cancerous or infected cells may stop expressing this protein, resulting in murder by natural killer cells. On to acquired immunity. Acquired immunity, otherwise known as adaptive immunity, develops after exposure to agents such as microbes, toxins, or other foreign substances. Unlike innate immunity, it reacts to pathogens with a very high specificity, takes more time to function, and is only found in vertebrates. It is made up of the humoral response, which involves B cells and antibodies defending the body's fluid, as well as cell-mediated response, which uses cytotoxic T cells to defend against infection with body cells. B cells are lymphocytes that develop in the bone marrow. Each B cell binds to a specific antigen. Antigen is simply the name for a substance that binds to lymphocytes, T or B cells, and causes an immune response. The B cell receptor is Y-shaped and has two antigen binding sites that each consist of a light chain in pink and a heavy chain in blue. Disulfide bridges in green link the heavy chains together and each of the light chains with a heavy chain. Each chain has a constant region in dark blue for the heavy chain and dark pink for the light chain. The constant regions have fairly consistent nucleotide sequences. The ends of these chains, in light pink and light blue, form the variable region. Named this because they change depending on the specific antigen to which the B cell can bind. The site that the antigen binds is circled in red. When activated by antigen or helper T cells, B cells begin a humoral response. They differentiate into plasma cells that secrete antibodies and memory B cells that can easily recognize the same antigen if it were to infect your body again. Memory B cells are identical to their parent cell. They are merely produced so that more cells with a specific antigen receptor exist, and thereby enhance the speed and intensity of immune response in the future. Plasma cells, on the other hand, are made solely to produce antibodies, otherwise known as immunoglobulin, which is abbreviated as Ig. This is called clonal selection, which is when an antigen triggers one variant of B cell with a specific complementary receptor to reproduce and trigger a humoral response. Antibodies are basically B cell receptors that are not bound to the membrane of a cell. B cells and antibodies can bind to antigen in the blood and lymph. Unlike B cells, T cells are lymphocytes that develop in the thymus. T cell receptors have two chains, an alpha chain, shown on the left in the picture, and a beta chain shown on the right in the picture. They are connected by a disulfide bridge. Like B cell receptors, they have a constant region and variable region, which is where antigen binds. Unlike B cells, T cells can only bind to antigen fragments that are presented to them by infected host cells. There are two kinds of T cells, helper T cells and cytotoxic T cells. When helper T cells are activated, they release cytokines that trigger a cell-mediated response in cytotoxic T cells and humoral response in B cells. Cytokines are messenger molecules released by the immune system cells. Cytotoxic T cells carry out a cell-mediated response and attack and kill infected cells. In order for a helper T cell to trigger responses in B cells and cytotoxic T cells, antigen must be presented to it by an infected host cell. MHC molecules are proteins that bind to and present fragments of antigen at the surface of infected cells. There are two classes of MHC molecules. Class 1 MHC molecules are presented by nucleated cells and are recognized by cytotoxic T cells, and Class 2 MHC molecules can be presented by dendritic cells, macrophages, or B cells, and are recognized by helper T cells or cytotoxic T cells. Beisho, why would you just say, how do you determine the biological sex of a chromosome? You pull down its genes. That's wildly inappropriate, Beisho. What is wrong with you? The acquired immune system has three properties. The first is receptor diversity. This means that there's an enormous amount of T cells and B cells with different shaped receptors compared to other T and B cells. The second property is lack of reactivity against body cells. When T cells and B cells are being made, they are tested to see if they are triggered by molecules that are supposed to be in your body. If they are triggered, they are destroyed. The third property of the acquired immune system is immunological memory. After a primary immune response, which is when you are infected for the first time and your immune system fights off whatever infected you, a secondary response kicks in. If the same pathogen infects you again, there are more memory B cells to detect the pathogen, so the immune response happens faster and with greater strength. This is the result of clonal selection mentioned earlier and is called a secondary immune response. The memory of your immune system is called immunological memory. Antibodies have many different ways they function in the immune response. The first of these is neutralization. I'm sorry, that was bad. Can we start over?
Yeah.
Okay, you ready?
Yep, go.
Antibodies have many different ways they function in the immune response. The first of these is neutralization. In neutralization, antibodies bind to the surface of viruses, rendering them unable to infect cells because they have nowhere to bind. Opsonization is the process in which antibodies bind to bacteria not to block infection, but to present the bacteria to a phagocytic cell to be phagocytized. In activation of complement, antibodies bind to bacteria, then to complement proteins. Complement proteins can enhance the inflammatory response or the phagocytic process. When antibodies bind to these proteins, an attack membrane complex is generated from pores on the membrane. Water and ions move into the cell and it lyses. So far, I've only talked about active immunity in the immune system. Active immunity is the response of the immune system produced by oneself when a pathogen requires an immune response. But there's also passive immunity. Passive immunity is when immunity is transferred from one individual to another. An example is when immunoglobulin G antibodies in the blood are transferred from mother to fetus. Another example is when immunoglobulin A antibodies are transferred through breast milk and therefore involve themselves in passive immunity. all in all, the immune system is pretty rad and coolio, if I do say so myself. And I do. Now, guys, remember to smash that like button and subscribe if you aren't already. Can we hit 100% on our grade? Can we hit 100%? If we hit 100% on our grade, I will literally eat a sock. And as always, thanks for Squarespace. Squarespace is wonderful.